Hello, I'm Jim Stark, the Executive Director of the Michigan Sports Legacy Conservancy, and welcome to our first LegacyCast. And I'm joined by one of my very, very good friends and a longtime sports analyst and sports guru here in town, Rob Otto.
Thanks, Jim. It's really an honor to be part of this first one and this first idea of doing a legacy cast, and I'm really excited about it. It's really an honor to be here.
We've talked about this a long time, Robbie, as we've gone back to our days together and your long-standing career as a broadcaster at WDFN, and you were the host of the Pistons pre- and post-game show. So you've been doing this sports commentating for a long time. But now that you're older, though, we get to start looking back. We start looking back. And that's, of course, what we do with the Michigan Sports Legacy Conservancy is we look back, we preserve, and we want to tell the story and interpret what's happened so that it's relevant to the people today.
Yeah, not only about what's happening now, but all of the historical equivalencies we can do, connecting what we are seeing today with what we have seen in the past. I think that's a wonderful way to bring the very rich sports history of the state of Michigan to life for the next generation. So these amazing people don't get lost.
And the lessons we learn from them and can teach the kids today. Yeah. And I know your education work is very important to help get kids engaged, get them motivated, get them inspired, and certainly the history of sports is what we're going to use as part of a medium for that inspiration.
And I know you've said this many times in the past, Jim, that we can take the biggest stars, the biggest names of the state of Michigan in the sports world, compare them to any other state in the United States, and they stack up with everybody. We've got the best baseball players and hockey players and football players, stack up boxers with everybody.
And it's a great segue, also the best broadcasters.
Right.
And today we're here to talk about somebody that you and I both knew professionally and personally a little bit, admired, respected, and that, of course, was the passing of the late, great Dick Enberg, and a co-alum of yours.
Right, yeah. I had so many connections with Dick Enberg that I didn't really realize. I mean, growing up here in the state of Michigan and hearing that voice, hearing the oh my, hearing the touch 'em all, right? Just a consummate professional. And not only the baseball, football and Rose Bowls and Olympics and tennis and golf. I mean, this guy could do it all and do it well. But it's as I got more into broadcasting from the state of Michigan, learned, Dick Enberg's from the state of Michigan. I go to Central Michigan University, and I learned Dick Enberg went to Central Michigan University. I joined a fraternity. It was Phi Sigma Kappa was the fraternity at Central. It was Phi Sigma Epsilon back when Dick Enberg was there. He was a member of my fraternity. It's like everything. I go into sportscasting. He, of course, is a legend, a hero of sportscasting. Every step along the way, I felt myself more and more connected to this amazing man. And then later in life, to be able to talk to him and get to know him and meet him. I mean, that is just, a lot of times they tell you don't meet your heroes because they almost never live up to expectations.
And sometimes it's that way.
Yeah, a lot of times it can be that way. But it was never that way with Dick Enberg.
Well, grew up in Armada, a small town, went to Central. When you were at Central, was he a legend there? Is that how they kind of regarded him at Central?
Well, think about it. It was the late 80s when I was in college, right? Okay, into the early 90s. So, yeah, he was already a legend. He already had 30 years under his belt of working in sportscasting. And so, yeah, he was doing the Olympics. He was doing Rose Bowls all through the 80s. Every Rose Bowl was Dick Enberg, right? And so that was the time when I grew up in my, early teens into my early 20s, really getting to love sports. That was the voice. And so we already knew, and it wasn't until after I got to Central I learned he went to Central. After I joined the fraternity, I learned he was actually one of my fraternity brothers, and he and I had conversations about that. And it was the conversations that Dick was the best at, right? He never had a conversation with anybody that somebody left saying, oh, boy, that Dick Enberg, what a disappointment.
Well, when Rob and I were in a previous position, we worked together on some special dream packages, and one of them was to fly to San Diego, see the Padres game, and then meet Dick Enberg. We said meet him in the booth and say hello, but tell the story of what Dick Enberg did for those lucky winning bidders.
Right, so these are all people from the Midwest. They flew out there. It was a Padres game. Dick was doing the play-by-play for the San Diego Padres on the radio out there, and it was an opportunity just to do a quick meet and greet with Dick Enberg, and also on the field because Kirk Gibson was on the staff at the time of Arizona.
It was Arizona and San Diego.
Padres hosting Arizona, who were in the same division. And so I got to go down there. Dick Enberg basically became their host for the whole day. He met them before the game. He's the one that physically walked them down on the field, got baseballs, and got Kirk Gibson and Alan Trammell was on the staff, got them to sign baseballs for these people. Then took them to lunch there, let them in the booth for like 3 or 4 innings. They basically got to hang out the whole day with Dick Enberg.
And then he take him to like the private club afterwards?
Yes, even after the game, he said, well, you guys are here in San Diego. You might as well just hang out with me for a while. Let's go, And so, it was supposed to be a 5-minute meet and greet with Dick Enberg. Literally turned into an entire day of hanging out with him in San Diego.
But that's who he was.
That's who he was.
He was a great person. He was a great human being above being a great broadcaster. The two things that I think of when I hear about him broadcasting, I remember him and Merlin Olsen, one of those first tandems, Now it's very prevalent.
The NFL games.
But they were, Dick Enberg, Merlin Olsen. But I remember Dick Enberg's voice. There was a football game, and it was like this thing where you had a little box, and it had a little recording, and you'd push the play, and the other guy would push the defense, and you'd play it was Dick Enberg's voice.
Doing the play-by-play?
On this game.
Wow.
But that's how prevalent he was. He was the voice of sports. And now in today's world of specialization, right, you see a guy, I only do football, I only do baseball. He did everything.
Everything. I mean, we're talking tennis to the Olympics. He did figure skating, right? He did golf. Any sport that was out there, he did it, and he did it exceedingly well.
And that's a testament to his skill as a broadcaster.
Right.
Because as a broadcaster, in some of my experience, it takes time to make it look like it's effortless. Takes a lot of time. Mm-hmm. When we see someone who's a good broadcaster, we say, "Wow, they were, that was effort." It wasn't effortless.
No,
it was
never.
For every 1 minute you're on the air, there's X amount you have to do. But he did that for all, and he could. Here's one of the examples of that. When he came into Detroit last year and did one Tiger game, okay, or this would have been 2016. Listening to him do that game, you'd have thought he did it all year long. He knew the nicknames, he knew the histories.
Right.
He was a broadcaster's broadcaster.
I want you to think about the difference between a football game to an individual skater, to a golf shot, all right, to baseball, to tennis, how different those sports are, and just describing in detail what they were doing, how well they were doing it, what they did wrong, being able to pick all that up. To be able to specialize in one sport where you only have to focus on one sport would be a lot easier than doing it for 10 different sports. And that's the type of broadcaster that Dick Enberg was.
But he came up at a time when the broadcasters weren't as revered as they are now. He came up at a time in the 70s when they weren't the highest paid person on the broadcast team. So he came up when you didn't turn down a gig.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Oh, and think about this, this is back when the NFL was testing. Let's do a whole game without any announcers. I think they were hoping that people would still love it as much, but it turned out, wow, the announcers kind of do make a big deal. Yeah. And that's when things started to escalate. Yeah. So Dick Enberg was there when he was making 50 cents an hour, and he was there when he was probably making quite a good living at this. But even when he didn't have to make a living, when he was out doing San Diego Padres games, he still kept doing it. Literally up until the last year of his life, he was still out there broadcasting games.
He broadcasted games this past year. He was here in Detroit for a weekend.
Right.
He would have gone. Now, he wasn't doing the full-time gig anymore.
No.
But his broadcasting skills were still, you got to use a handful. There's Ernie Harwell, there's Vin Scully, a couple of others that were still great into their 80s.
Absolutely.
Dick Enberg's one of those guys.
I agree. 2 stories I want to tell about Dick Enberg. One, when we were doing some stuff with him and had to get some voiceover work done, he called me back on my cell phone, and I wasn't able to pick up, and so I had a message from Dick Enberg. Hey, Rob, this is Dick Enberg. Like in that Dick Enberg voice. I saved that voicemail for years. For your play. Listen, Dick Enberg's on my phone.
He called me.
Right, exactly. And there's another thing about 8 years ago. There was a book called The Great List of Detroit's, The Great Book of Detroit Sports List. Mike Stone, Art Regner, icons here in Detroit, sports radio broadcasting, wrote this book. And they went out and they let other people write certain sections of the book, like one page. We want you to do this kind of list. Knowing I was a CMU alum, they said, hey, Rob, will you do the top athletes from Central Michigan University? It's Tom Tresh and Dan Roundfield and Dan Marley, right? And Kevin Tapani, that kind of stuff. Yep. And I said, I'll only do it if you let me do the top sports icons
Yep.
from Central Michigan University because I knew who my number one was going to be. And he never got on the field. He actually played baseball when he was younger, but never at Central Michigan University. And I knew number one had to be Dick Enberg. And so they let me do the top sports icons. 9 athletes, number one was Dick Enberg.
And icon's a good word because he transcended sports. He was a personality, but you liked him.
Yeah.
It wasn't one of these guys you like to hate. He wasn't Howard Cosell, who you watched because you wanted to throw things at the TV.
Bombastic, yeah.
Exactly. He made everybody else better.
You know, it's really interesting, and it was really a tragedy, his passing recently, because it just never got to have one more conversation with him,
Right.
which I would have loved.
Right.
A lot of times when somebody passes on, people only point out the nice things, and then kind of as it drifts off, you find out all the not so nice things tend to come out about them. Every single story about Dick Enberg was about what a great guy he was, where someone was just bumped into him and he had a 20-minute conversation. I was a lowly intern at some little radio station in the middle of nowhere, and he talked to me and gave me career advice. Everybody that had some sort of interaction with Dick Enberg had nothing but nice things to say, and I've heard nothing to the contrary since.
No,
and I think that's, when you talk about legacy,
Right.
that's his legacy.
That's his legacy. As a consummate professional, a broadcaster's broadcaster, made the other people he worked with better, didn't need the spotlight, wasn't the show himself. All those things made him a good person in addition to being a broadcaster. But as you said, it's part of his legacy. And will, as part of what we're going to do now with the Michigan Sports Legacy Conservancy, is take those legacies, those lessons, those examples, and use them to inspire young broadcasters.
Right.
Inspire people as to how to treat other people in the sports world, not just, because I'm a superstar. Because he was a superstar.
He was, no doubt about
But
it.
you never know it. And so we're lucky to have him as part of our lore, as part of our legacy. And hopefully, as you and I go on and do these more and more, it'll be someone in their 90s and 100, not 82, like Dick Enberg was. And he went too early.
Still too soon. Yep,
But
still
for
too
us,
soon.
to be able to share some time with you about Dick Enberg is a pleasure. It's an honor. We'll do this more as the personalities come around. We want to talk about more. One thing about Rob Otto I want to mention, you can read his blog now.
Yep, DetroitSportsNation.com. You'll be able to check me out right there.
And hopefully Rob will be a blogger on our website when I can afford to pay him. I can't quite work up that much money yet. So
I'm kind of a big deal. I'm no Dick Enberg.
So for Rob Otto and I'm Jim Stark, thanks for watching our first LegacyCast. We'll do these on a regular basis, so stay tuned right here to mislc.org for our next LegacyCast.